And you're not live yet? I am. So I'm just letting everyone know that we're getting in, we're getting settled. This is like the original Passover, so we have little Israelites running everywhere. So stay tuned, and I'm going to let people make a plate and sit down. And once they get seated, then we'll begin. So we're going to leave the video running, and we'll turn the audio down so you can't hear this ruckus, and then we'll turn it back up. All right, so please stay tuned. We'll probably start in 15 minutes or so. So we just wanted you to be part of it. unmuted. Is everybody ready? So you don't worry about me. Just ignore me, and you keep eating all the great food. This is for people who don't have good food to eat. So make sure I have my Bible. I'm going to need that. Are you up, Dave? Okay. So I want to say welcome. Thank you all for coming. It really means a lot to me to share in one of arguably the oldest traditions on the planet. This meal dates back to the time of the Exodus from Egypt. And so while it's not a traditional Passover Seder, I will touch on elements of the traditional Passover Seder. So I'm not only welcoming those of you who are here with us today, but also people literally from all over the world. The benefit that you have is that you get to eat this lovely food and they have to just watch you. But I'm assuming that in every home across this country and across the world that are joining us, that people are participating in a similar meal. And so I just want to say thank you for everyone taking the time to join in this ancient festival. So I did want to say one thing. There are some traditional elements that I'll touch on, and I'll make a few points as we go about the meal. So Dave's going to run the camera, and hopefully you'll be able to keep up, those of you who are online. So please, if you're here, continue to eat. If you need to get up and go grab something else, that's okay. And children don't bother me, see? So that doesn't bother me, because imagine how noisy it was when 600,000 men plus women plus children plus goats and so forth left the land of Egypt. So I promise you it's a little bit quieter in here than it was there. So without further ado, I want to start with a traditional question. And the traditional question, though it's not in the traditional setting, is why is this night different than any other night? One thing that's different, those of you who listen to my regular weekly teachings, I'm sitting down. So there is a tradition, according to Passover, where people are reclining. And so some of you may get tired of me talking. This is going to take 6 or 7 hours. I just told you it was about an hour to get you here. 6 or 7 hours from now, there's a couch. You might want to fight for that position. The rest of you might not be as comfortable. But I did want to say it is different than any other night. This is a very special festival. It's one of the festivals of Yehovah, one of the festivals that's listed in Leviticus chapter 23 in your Bible. It also is listed in other passages, but the bulk of the story comes to us from the book of Exodus, primarily the 12th chapter of the book of Exodus. I wanted to touch on a couple of things. In a nutshell, if you say, tell me the story of Passover in brief, here it is. It's the same as many other biblical stories. They, the enemy, tried to kill God's people, and they didn't. God's people win, right? That's the story of Passover. The enemy tries to crush out, stamp out the people, and God delivers his people. There is on your table, we're not going to work through these, but I'll touch on elements. This is called a Haggadah. In Hebrew, the word is based on a root word that means to tell the story. And so traditionally in Jewish homes and in other settings where they actually keep this festival, they follow what they call a Seder. A Seder means order. So you're going to learn Hebrew tonight. Haggadah means it's to tell, and Seder means order. So in most Passover Seders, they follow a very strict order. There are 15 observances. If you look on your table at this Haggadah, page 19 lists out 15 ordinances, everything from special procedures to wash the hands and what order that you eat certain things in. I've been at Passover Seders, and many of you might have as well, where the meal lasts about 4 hours. maybe sometimes longer, right, Sherry? We've been in some pretty long ones. I think some of you have as well. I'm not here to say that that's wrong, because those are great ways to tell the story. And quite honestly, it takes some time to tell the story. I'm not going to take that long, and I'm not following this order. Now, what we're going to do is I am going to stress some important points from this ancient story. Passover is a story about redemption, salvation, and deliverance. It's a freedom festival. It's a festival that talks about freedom from tyranny, freedom from persecution, freedom from oppression. And one of the things that I like to tell people, and I don't know that a lot of people know this, there's a great book, by the way, I'm going to recommend. It's called America's Prophet, Moses and the American Story. It's written by a man named Bruce Feiler. And one of the things that he says in here that I think is significant, every year at Passover, I think this is one of my favorite books that I've ever read outside the Bible. Because what he says is that Passover is one of the greatest inspirations to humanity. Think about it. The pilgrims referenced leaving Egypt when they came to the new land. Not only that, but Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, when they proposed their seal for the United States, they actually used images from the Exodus from Egypt. You know, this idea that freedom from tyranny or opposition to tyranny is service to God. So Passover represents two things. It represents leaving tyranny and the servanthood, being enslaved and oppressed by a tyrant, but it doesn't relieve us of servanthood, because basically the people left the servanthood of Pharaoh to serve the living God. That's what the story is really about. Now, one of the things I wanted to make mention of is that this group, to my knowledge, there are no traditional Orthodox Jews in the room with us tonight. The interesting thing about Passover, especially over the last 20 to 30 years, is that more and more and more, mostly from Christianity, have begun to want to experience these festivals from the Bible. And it goes something like this. Leviticus 23 doesn't say that these are Jewish festivals. It says these are the festivals of Jehovah. They're the festivals of the Lord. So we can learn from them, we can benefit from them, and all of us, I think, can be inspired by the message that these festivals contain. So the other reason that we're telling this story is because biblically we're commanded. Biblically, there are several passages, 3 that I can think off the top of my head, that tell us to tell the story. And I want to begin. I'm going to read you a few texts, and I'm going to talk a little bit while you enjoy your food. Please, if you need more, simply get up and go get some more. Don't worry about distracting me. I had 6 kids, and I have 5 grandkids and 1 on the way, right? Is that right? It's growing. My tribe is growing. Blessed be the name of Jehovah. So when I go through these texts, if you're eating, don't worry about following along. If you can pull up a Bible, feel free to join me. I'm going to begin in Deuteronomy chapter 6, and I'm going to read verses 20 through 25. And it says this: when your son asks you in time to come, what is the meaning of the testimonies and ordinances and statutes which Jehovah our God has commanded you, then you shall say to your son, notice, we were Pharaoh's slaves in Egypt, and Jehovah brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Jehovah showed signs and wonders great and grievous against Egypt and against Pharaoh and all his household before our eyes. And he brought us out from there that he might bring us in, give us the land which he swore to give to our fathers. And Jehovah commanded us to do all these statutes, to fear Jehovah our God always, and for our good always, that he might preserve us alive as at this day, and it will be righteousness for us if we're careful to do this commandment before Jehovah our God as he commanded us. So one of the things that I like to point out anytime I teach is that contrary to what is popularly taught, keeping the commandments does equal righteousness. Righteousness is very here clearly stated that to do these things is our righteousness. And so that's something that I think is important. Now, if you're taking notes, Exodus chapter 10 and verse 2 and Exodus chapter 12 verses 24 through 27 actually give us a similar statement about keeping the commandments and how we're to tell the story of the Exodus. This is the one thing that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is known for, what we're going to talk about tonight. Now, one other text that I wanted to read, actually I have about 600, but one other that I wanted to go to next, actually it's not that bad. Deuteronomy chapter 4. Deuteronomy chapter 4. This sort of sums it up. Moses in Deuteronomy is looking back on and describing the great deliverance that took place coming out of Egypt. And if you begin in Deuteronomy chapter 4, beginning in verse 32, it says, "For ask now of the days that are past, which were before you since the day that God created man upon the earth, and ask from one end of heaven to the other, whether such a great thing," notice the words, great thing like this has ever happened. Did any people ever hear the voice of a God speaking out of the midst of fire as you have heard and still live? Or has any God ever attempted to go and take a nation for himself from the midst of another nation by trials, by signs, by wonders, by war, by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and by great terror, according to all that Jehovah your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes? He goes on to say that the reason that this great thing, as he calls it, took place was so that the children of Israel would know forever that God is one and there is no other. Deuteronomy chapter 4. This is a great thing you're participating in tonight. So the story of the Exodus and the story of the redemption from the land of Egypt, in Psalm 105, it recounts this great deliverance. And one of the things that it says is, remember now, the children of Israel were in the land of Egypt for 400 and some odd years. This was predicted in Genesis 15 before there was ever a people of Israel. In other words, before Abraham even had any children, God tells Abraham that his descendants would be captive to an oppressive nation, and that they would there be forced to live in oppression and tyranny and slavery, but that at the right time that they would be rescued out and they would go out with many possessions. So the children of Israel actually do end up going into the land of Egypt. Now you remember the story of Joseph. Joseph, some of the stories that are contained in the Bible about Joseph are among the greatest of all literature. I love these stories. Joseph ends up going, he's sold by his brothers into slavery, and then he is exalted to a position that one must go through him in order to achieve life. Joseph becomes the one, he was known initially as the Lord of the dreams. His brothers make fun of him. Some of us in this room are dreamers. But God begins to give Joseph dreams. His brother about the dreams. And if you've had brothers, if you have brothers, you know, especially if you're not the oldest, that sometimes the olders pick on the younger. Well, they took it as far as you can imagine. I think Brooke is thinking sisters do that too, right? So, but the idea is that sibling rivalry is a big part of this story. Joseph ends up in slavery, but he's exalted. The Lord of the dreams ultimately becomes the Lord of the land. It's one of the greatest stories in the Bible. And what we have is that at a certain time, after Joseph's dream provides substance and sustenance for the people of the land, nurturing people and helping them through the great famine, that ultimately what begins to happen after the death of Joseph, the book of Exodus begins with a statement after naming the people of Israel. It says, "A new king arose over Egypt that knew not Joseph." And the story begins to take a different turn. The people of Egypt, at the head of Pharaoh, at the command of Pharaoh, begin to oppress cruelly the people of Israel, forcing them to labor and so forth. Now, one of the things that I wanted to show you, the traditional food that we have on the table. Sherry, did you make the charoset? It is made of dates and honey and nuts and apples, and it represents the mortar. One of the things in the story of the Bible, it says that the people of Israel were forced to make mortar. So if you have this in front of you, you might want to taste it. It's not real mortar, I promise you. It won't stick to your teeth, so you're welcome. Well, it might, but it's not going to be like eating real mortar. It's got a lovely taste. So sample the mortar and get into the story. One of the things about the Passover is we want you to experience the experience. We want you to feel part of this particular story. But one of the things that I want you to understand is that at the same time, when this cruel, oppressive regime begins to enact its rulings against the people of God, it's at the same time that God brings a deliverer. And we all focus on Moses in the story, but ladies, it's not always about the men who are the secret behind the salvation. And I want to make this, I always think it's important to make this point. In the story, behind the scenes, if you will, the true deliverance in many ways comes from, Mikey, go ahead and come in and make you a plate, brother. This is my adopted son, Mikey. How you doing, Mikey? So one of the things that we often overlook is that we focus on Moses and Aaron, but let me mention a few of the women that are important to our story. There are two Hebrew midwives. I always think it's interesting that we don't even know the name of the Pharaoh. Think about that. The rude, crude, ruling authority of the known world at the time, and we don't even know his name. But you know who we know? We know two Hebrew midwives named Shiphrah and Puah. These women were told to take the boys out and to get rid of the boys who were over all the Israelite children. But these women feared God, it said, and they didn't. Here's another woman who was instrumental in the salvation of the people of Israel. Moses, his mother. Instead of cowering and giving up her child, she makes a way for him to be saved, and she puts him in a basket. You've seen the movie, Charlton Heston, right? You've seen the 10 Commandments, and she puts the baby in the basket, and the baby is watched over closely by another girl. Her name is Miriam. Now, a lot of people, again, focus on Moses and Aaron, but if you're taking notes, write down Micah chapter 6, verse 4, because it talks about the deliverance being led by three people, not one. Miriam, Moses, and Aaron. If it weren't for Miriam's watchful eye as she eases her brother in the basket and watches from the bulrushes, you see, she's in this story. And then there's another woman. It's not all about the Hebrews, because Pharaoh's daughter, she goes down to bathe, and she has around her maids, and they see this baby, and he's crying, and they pull the baby out of the basket, and she takes this child in. It's another moving part of the story. I think it's real important that we not forget this. So one of the things that I like to do is to bring that into the storytelling. Now, Moses, as he grows up in the palace of the Egyptians, at some point very early on, within the first couple of chapters of the book of Exodus, he begins to feel drawn to his own people. We're not really told how he knows, The book, the movie might give us a little more insight if you trust Hollywood and Cecil B. DeMille. But he begins to think about his people. He's a Levite. His mom, his dad are from the tribe of Levi. And Moses goes out, and we begin to get a picture of the character of Moses and why he is selected by God to lead this great thing, this great deliverance. Moses looks upon, he sees a scene one day where an Egyptian is beating a Hebrew, and he steps in to defend. In another picture, we see two Hebrews fighting, and Moses, again, steps in to defend. Now, word gets out that Moses has defended to the point of even killing the one who was beating the Hebrew. So they put a bounty on him, basically, and he has to flee. Moses goes to a wilderness area, and he meets up with 7 shepherd girls. Can you imagine a young Moses? We don't know exactly, maybe we know exactly his age, but he walks up, he finds 7 shepherdesses, the daughter of a priest by the name of Jethro. He's also known as Ruel. He's the priest of Midian. And Moses defends the girls against some attacking shepherds. And it puts him in good with the family. He actually ends up marrying a good girl named Zipporah. You know the rest of the story. He has a couple of kids. But Moses' life is not his own. He can't just go and be happily ever after and raise a family in Midian, because while he's shepherding his flock at a place called Horeb, called Sinai, he ends up coming across a burning bush. And some of you have heard this story. It's from Exodus chapter 3. He sees, as he's shepherding a flock, he sees the bush is burning, but it's not consumed. And so one of the things that as he approaches to investigate, he's called by God at this very scene. You remember the story. He's told, take off your shoes, for the ground on which you stand is holy ground. And he's told by God that it's him, it's Moses, who must go redeem the children of Israel from the land of Egypt. Moses offers many reasons as to why he shouldn't be the one to do it. He offers up many good reasons. I'm not an eloquent speaker. How can I do this? And oh, by the way, if I'm going to get this people of yours out of bondage, they're going to ask me your name. What will I tell them? And in this particular scene, this gripping scene, as you read the story, he's told that God's name is I will be that I will be. In Hebrew, it's Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. He says, you tell them that Yehovah has sent you to bring them out of the land of Egypt. So Moses takes the mission. You know the old James Bond, this is the mission. If you choose to accept it, Moses finally, reluctantly accepts the mission, and he goes forward just as he's told to do. Now, one of the things that I think is interesting is that in Exodus chapter 4, verses 21 through 23, I'm paraphrasing, but I'm giving you the references so you can look these up. God tells Moses, when you go to Pharaoh and you tell him to let my people go, he's not going to do it. Not initially. Ultimately, he will, but only after he's hit with multiple strikes. Because what we're going to find is as the story unfolds, Pharaoh has a hard heart. And Pharaoh is unknowing of this God of the Hebrews. He feels that he himself is a God. So you can imagine going before Pharaoh, which Moses is charged to do, and say, thus says Yehovah, let my people go. And he says, I don't even know who you're talking about. Never heard of that God. Now, by the end of the story, has he heard of that God? Absolutely. He's heard of him. He's felt him. He's experienced him. But one of the main things about the story, if you begin in the beginning of Exodus and you work your way through, one of the things that you'll find is that ultimately the reason for the Passover is that so everyone will know Yehovah, the God of Abraham, Isaac, say hey. That's Isaac. And Jacob. That was perfect timing. See how that worked? We didn't even plan that. So in Exodus chapter 4, God says something interesting. He refers to Israel as his son. Now, a lot of people in different religions think about the Son of God, but in Exodus chapter 4, 21 through 23, he says, go tell Pharaoh, let my son go. If you don't let my son go, I'll take your son out. He tells him that. Moses goes to Pharaoh repeatedly, and here's what he says. And you're going to practice this with me. I'm going to teach you this Hebrew phrase. It's one of the most important phrases of Passover. Get ready. Shalak et ami. Shalak et ami. Now, it's translated, let my people go. But in Hebrew, it's a little bit stronger than that. In grammar, we have this thing, I'm not going to try to teach grammar, but is a thing called adjussive, where it's sort of permissive, and it's translated, let my people go. But the Hebrew is stronger than that. Send forth my people. It's very strong, and he says this 9 times in the story. Shalak et ami, shalak et ami. And at times, Pharaoh allows them seemingly some reprieve. He tells Moses, if you take this plague off, I'll let some of you go. And he doesn't. And then he says, how about you just, the Pharaoh says, how about you just take some of the people, like leave the women and children? And he says, no, I'm taking everybody. There's a famous passage in the text where Moses says, I will not leave one hoof behind. Everybody goes. We're all going. So he continues to go back, shalak et ami, and he continues to tell him no. And the more that Pharaoh forbids the children of Israel from leaving, the more hardened his heart becomes. Here are the plagues. It begins with this. The water turns to blood. After the water turns to blood, frogs jump up. And this isn't just like a few frogs, Kalel. This is like in my pool out front, because it's green, because Bibi's not here, and she's usually the one that takes care of the pool. You know how we have frogs? Imagine all the river of Egypt, all of the Nile, the frogs come out, all the frogs, and they're hopping up. It's such a gross story that the frogs are all in their cooking pots. Now, you just ate some wonderful food, and you might be going back. By the way, if you need more, go back. But can you imagine how unappetizing it would be if you went to get some more, and in that, there were frogs? Not very appealing, right? But these people had frogs in their baskets and their cooking pots. But it doesn't stop there, because then the frogs begin to die. And then the next thing that happens is lice begin to infest the entire land. And it's really, really gross. This is a gross story, I know it. And then, as if that weren't enough, then we have swarms, and then we have pestilence, and it continues to get worse. And then boils, you know, just big boils showing up on man and beast. But still, Pharaoh will not let them go, will not let the people go. And then hail comes from the sky and kills livestock. It's just getting worse. The locusts come next. And then darkness comes upon the land. And the Bible says that darkness came upon the land for 3 full days. And it's not just a little bit of darkness. It's really, really dark. It describes it like a blanket over the people. It's so dark, it says in the Bible in Exodus chapter 10, that you could literally feel it. Imagine, people didn't even want to get out of their beds. They think it's the end of the world. It feels like it's the end of the world. There's one interesting point, though. The people of Israel, it says, had light in their dwellings. They had light. And the people of Israel are called to be a light to the nations, so it's symbolic in many ways. Israel has a great responsibility to shed light to the rest of the dark world. We live in a world that's full of darkness. There are bad things that are going on. The only way to defeat darkness is through light. And this is a message within the message, that we ought to be that light. Now, one of the things that I think is interesting is that the final plague is called the plague of the firstborn. God had said, if you don't let my son go, then I'm going to take your son out. All firstborn in Egypt. It's the most horrifying story that you'll read. Can you imagine, in every home, the firstborn has passed away? And finally, because of this, the children of Israel are allowed to leave. And when they leave, they're not only are they allowed to leave, they're basically chased out. But as they flee, 600,000 some odd men, plus women, plus children, plus their animals, they leave and they're given possessions by their neighbors. Just take it and go. Here's some things, you can have it. Just get out. But as they leave, the Pharaoh changes his mind. He realizes that he's let all of his servants leave, and he decides to chase them down. So imagine, if you will, the people of Israel en masse. The whole nation is going. They're leaving Egypt. They're heading towards the Red Sea. Dave and I went to a place on the Red Sea. And as they arrive close to the sea, you know, I'm expediting the story. There's more to it. Behind them, they hear the hoofs and the chariots of the Pharaoh's troops coming at them. The people of Israel begin to cry out, why are you doing this? Why did we even leave? We had it made in Egypt. You know, they longed to return. They yearned to return to the bad. Even though it was bad, it was what they knew. Here they feel they're going to die in the wilderness. But they end up, and they have the sea before them, troops behind them. What do? So they cry out to God. One of the most interesting passages, I love this scene, in Exodus chapter 14, verse 15, God says this to Moses, why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to move forward, to go forward. And they have faith, and it tells the story of how Moses holds out his rod. Now, this is, everything else in the movie may be exactly right, but Cecil misses this one. It's not, you hold the stick out. Let me do my stick. It's not like he goes and the sea parts. It didn't happen like that. It says in the story that he holds out his staff, and when he does, this wind blows all night, and it creates, according to the story, it creates a wall of water on both sides, splitting the sea in half. Now, some have sought a scientific answer for this, and some of those are pretty interesting theories. I'm not sure how it looked, but in my mind, I can imagine, because the Hebrew uses the phrase that can mean that on either side, the water is congealed. Like you could poke your hand. You see, what was the Prince of Egypt, the Disney movie? It's actually pretty cool, because you can see the water and the fish swimming by, and the people are walking through it. But it's, I don't know if it looked just like that, but I like to think about it like that. But in the Hebrew Bible, I wanted to pass you or show you, now some of you may not know Hebrew, that's okay. But if you look at a traditional text, the story from Exodus chapter 15, see how the words are staggered like this? The words are staggered because it's meant, the scribes write it like that. It's in all the scrolls, it's in all traditional Hebrew texts, because it represents the wall of the water. Now, Exodus 15 is called the Song of Moses, and it's the song that they sing when they pass through. Some of you know this song, and it begins something like this. I will sing unto the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously, the horse and the rider thrown into the sea. Now, some of you might know that song. That's about the best I get it, and that's about all I know of it. But I can read Exodus 15. And the story says that when they went into this place between the walls of water, that it wasn't just sloshing through mud, but the miracle of miracles happens, and they cross dry shod. It's actually dry, and they go through, and the Egyptians are bearing down, and they're coming, and they're coming. And as they go into the place between the wall of water, those who sought to destroy Israel were themselves destroyed. The water comes crashing down, and the people of Israel come out on the other side triumphant, victorious, and they go to the other side and they begin a long journey to inherit the promises. But the people of Israel, at this point, when they walk through to the other side, they are now going to a place in the wilderness where they'll be communicated the teachings of God, the very teachings that the people of Israel have preserved. And that's why we have our Bible today, that for these many thousands of years, they've kept this tradition alive. They've maintained the scripture for us. We have copies of the Hebrew Bible complete that go back to the 9th century. But those who would criticize and suggest that it was created at a late date were shocked, as the world was, when in the 40s, they discovered scrolls found at a place called Qumran, the Dead Sea area. These texts go back 2,200 years. They validate what we have in our present Hebrew Bibles. So these stories have a continuity. They go way back. They go very way back. The people of Israel received the teaching, the Torah of Moses, and we have a Torah scroll here in our cabinet we're very blessed to possess. And it is, as the Jewish people say, this is the teaching of Moses. It's the same story according to tradition that was delivered these many years ago when they left Egypt. Now, here's something I want to tell you. That God, called Jehovah in the Hebrew text, is actually known. He is known as the God who saved the Israelites out of the land of Egypt. If you were to ask Jehovah to identify himself throughout the Bible, he does so many, many times. And it says quite often, I am Jehovah who saved the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. A couple of examples. Let me just read a couple for you. Isaiah chapter 63. And I'll post these on my website or our website so that you can look them up. Isaiah 63 verse 12 says this. Let me back up to verse 11. Then he remembered the days of old of Moses his servant. Where is he who brought up out of the sea the shepherd of his flock? Where is he who put in the midst of them his Holy Spirit, who caused his glorious arm to go at the right hand of Moses, who divided the waters before them to make for himself an everlasting name, who led them through the depths like a horse in the desert? And he goes through and he talks about how this is the God who brought the children of Israel up out of the land of Egypt. Another very clear example, Jeremiah chapter 32, verse 20. Daniel chapter 9, verse 15. I'm going through these quickly so you can look at them later. Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 10. Now, one of the things that I like to bring up about this great story of the Exodus is that many people look forward to a new covenant. In Jeremiah chapter 31, beginning in verse 31 and going through verse 34, it says this. Days are surely coming, saith Jehovah, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Not like the covenant that I made with their fathers when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt. That's the story we're telling. Which my covenant they broke, though I was a husband to them. But this is the covenant that I'll make with them after those days. I'll forgive their sins. I'll place my law within their heart. Now, here's something I want to say to you. A lot of people think about this and they say, you know, the Torah will be written on the heart. Meaning, in our understanding, Genesis 1 through Deuteronomy 34. It's going to be written on the heart. But I'll give you an example. Did you know that when the 10 Commandments are given, Exodus chapter 20, in Exodus 20, how does Exodus 20 begin? In Exodus 20, it says, I am Jehovah your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Now, Exodus 20 leads us into the 10 Commandments. Now, in Jeremiah chapter 16, in Jeremiah chapter 23, it says that days are coming when it will no longer be said, Jehovah lives who brought the children of Israel up out of the land of Egypt, but Jehovah lives who brought the children of Israel up out of all the lands. So the point being that there is coming a new covenant. And this salvation that's coming will be so great, so incredibly amazing, that no longer will people actually even talk about the Exodus that we're talking about tonight. Now that's something to think about. There's one other thing that I'd like to add. In Jeremiah chapter 32, beginning in verse 37 through verse 41, one of the things that it says is that this one thing that God promises to do with all his heart and soul. Jeremiah 32, 37 through 41. Now think about this. God, some people say whatever God does, he does with all his heart and soul. But in Scripture, it only says that there's one thing that God will do with his entire heart and soul. And that's he's going to bring the children of Israel out of all the lands into which they've been scattered. And he's going to bring them and plant them in the land that he promised their fathers with all his heart and soul. Look that up and think about that. For more than 7 decades, United Israel World Union has placed an emphasis on not only what the Bible says as far as the historical element. In fact, I have on my desk here, which is somewhat cluttered, but there's a method to my madness. I have a letter dated March 16th, 1944, in which our founder wrote a letter to a growing group of people at that time. And he wished them a happy Passover season. And this is 1944. United Israel has kept Passover, its membership has kept Passover for this many years. But they're not, in a way, that's a long time. We're talking 74 years. But the people of Israel have kept this festival going all the way back with very few interruptions to the time of the Exodus. So that's why I told you when I started, this is one of the most ancient festivals on the planet. But I wanted to say something because United Israel is not only interested in the historical, but one of the things that it also is interested in is this prophetic fulfillment of not only reaching the tribes of Israel who are placed out throughout all nations. You can't recognize all of Israel at this time. Israel has become, for all intents and purposes, red and yellow, black and white. People are beginning to wake up. People are beginning to attach themselves to the Hebraic tradition, and United Israel wants to be one of those groups who are there to welcome this group as they come in and to prepare for the greater exodus that the prophets speak about. So it's my prayer as we celebrate Passover all over the land, all over the world, that every shackle that presently binds you in your life, I pray that your burdens are broken, that you're relieved from all oppression, and that ultimately humanity learns that the Hebrew Bible at its core has a message of freedom and liberty to all people. When I tell you that Martin Luther King Jr., the night before he was assassinated, appealed to the exodus from Egypt when he said, I may not get there with you, but I've been to the mountaintop. I have seen the promised land. You see, people can relate to the story of freedom. And in our world today, we have people that are oppressed. We have people that are abused. We have people who are persecuted. And it's our task, if we believe in the Bible, to stand up for those who are persecuted and abused and oppressed. We have to look for opportunities to bring people to a freedom and a saving knowledge of the one God of Israel. So I want to tell you that we live in a time, and I pray that we see in our day the ultimate redemption. I pray that we get to see this because I think that all of humanity yearns for the freedom that's declared here. Remember, in Leviticus chapter 25, verse 10, there's a verse that's put on the Liberty Bell. And in this particular passage, it talks about a declaration of liberty, to declare liberty to all the inhabitants of the land. So think about this when we think about freedom and liberty and things of that nature. So the heart of the Bible is about a declaration of freedom from slavery, but it doesn't relieve us of the greatest challenge of our day. Israel was to be free from serving tyrants, but they were not free from serving God. The only reason that God redeems all of us religious people is so that we might learn to be servants of everyone around us. I pray that we get this message and that we take it to heart and that we look for opportunities in our everyday life to stand up for those that need to be broken free of their chains. So there is the story of Passover in a nutshell. All right? Is everybody did you get that? Is that the quickest Passover Seder? Now, why did I do it quickly? Because I let you eat, by the way, too. You should be thanking me because most people don't do this. I broke every protocol when I did this. But here's something that it says. It says, now John brought this staff. This is John's. This is the big, it's like the Moses staff. You get to be Moses, right? And then, but this staff is my staff. One of the things about Passover is I told you that most of these Seders last about 4 or 5 hours. But what does it say in the Bible? It says that you're to protect. Here's what the meal consists of. They did the lamb, right? That was a Passover. But they also did these elements. You have to have unleavened bread, right? And you have to have bitter herbs. Now, what we did was, as most traditional Seders, we put horseradish. Now, you have to do this. I mean, like it's a law. I mean, you have to taste this. It's the law. I mean, what can I say? So what you do is you need to taste a little bit. Does everyone have horseradish? No. Yeah, okay. So we'll do that. We'll do that in a minute. But I want everyone, wherever you're at, if you just go to the grocery store, get a little bit of bitter herb, because during Passover, that's one of the things that you do. You eat unleavened bread and the bitter herbs. I'm going to do that in a minute when I'm not on camera in case I choke. Actually, I like it. I'm used to it now. But it says to eat this with your sandals on your feet and staff in your hand and eat it in haste. So why is it that we eat unleavened bread? We eat unleavened bread for 7 days, actually, because beginning tonight, we enter into a period called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Now, the reason it's unleavened is because the people of Israel, they had to hurry to get out. So they didn't have time for their bread to rise. So that's why we eat the unleavened bread. And it tells us in Scripture to eat unleavened bread for 7 days. And oh, by the way, don't eat any bread like with leaven in it. So I'll tell you, I'm going to tell on myself. When I was new to this and I was learning about the Bible and I'm trying to follow God's law as best I can, I had just given up eating pork. I mean, it took, by the way, I've told this before, it took me a while to admit that pepperoni was pork. I tried to play like I didn't know. But at the time, I was so excited because we had this thing. Some of you are laughing like, yeah, I didn't admit it either. But one of the things that I did was I was so excited because where I worked at the time, they had biscuits. They brought in biscuits. And I was so excited because there was a chicken biscuit. At the time I ate meat. And so I thought, oh man, this is great. They, I can eat. So I'm about halfway through the biscuit and I realized that it's the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And I broke another rule. And I was thinking at that time, this is probably 2.5 decades ago. And I thought, I'm never going to get to hang all these rules. So, but I can tell you that it's as important if you try to keep this feast, even if in spirit and principle, to get into the season, if you will, to eat unleavened bread every day for 7 days and to go without leavened bread for 7 days. It's two sides of this coin. And part of this is a lot of people find themselves feeling better. You just kind of detox from leaven. But anyway, so I encourage people to try to keep the feast without the leaven. It sounds like someone said in 1 Corinthians, someone might have quoted that. But the idea is to leave out the leaven and to eat unleavened bread. So I wish every one of you, in Hebrew we say Chag Pesach Sameach, and Chag is a festival. It literally means to twirl. Like you spinning around in a festive mood and you're dancing. So in a little while, we're going to have all the people in here dancing and singing, and some of you are like, I'm not doing that. But Pesach is the Hebrew word for Passover. And the story is about how at the last night, when that last plague came through, that when God came through, he literally passed over the homes of those that were marked as his people. And I encourage all of us to think about, what does it take in our day to be counted among the people of God? What would it take? I mean, are we the kind of people that we ought to be? It's an encouragement for all of us to look for ways to do, as I was saying in the close of my talk. So think about that. You can get matzah in many grocery stores. Someone said they have it at Walmart now, so that's great. But please, get a box of these dry crackers. And a lot of people are getting pretty creative with this. I mean, Jamie was saying he likes to eat the pizza. I do too. I mean, you take these nice little matzah and you put sauce on them, and no pepperoni, none of that, but you put cheese and so forth, and eat you a nice vegetarian matzah pizza. And by the time you get through with 7 days of this, of eating peanut butter and jelly on these things like I do, you're going to be looking for creative recipes. So I hope that people will post those on our Facebook page. We're going to leave the camera on. I'm going to take the microphone off, and I'm going to participate, and we're going to fellowship. And so don't talk bad about me around the microphone or around the camera, because it's on. There's a hot mic in the room, but we're going to leave it on so that people can fellowship. And I just wanted to say thank you for everyone showing up, and thank you to all of you who joined us from all over the world. Remember the phrase, Shalak et ami. Shalak et ami. Now, here's one other thing. One of the things that United Israel wants to do is, as that's translated, let my people go, we want to take an active role in something that sounds very similar. Let my people know. One of the things that I want to do in my role at United Israel is to teach what it is that the Bible truly says. And so I welcome people who have questions, and they might come from a different faith tradition, but I welcome those questions. And part of our role here at United Israel is to inform people about the true biblical message. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for coming. Shalak et ami. That's right. All right. Now, if we had our speakers hooked up, we could go ahead and start doing the music. Some of the bitter herbs. Who? I think I did this to him last year. We'll see if he remembers. Now, did everyone get just a little bit? It doesn't take much, but you need to taste it. Look. You can just turn. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Yeah, you have to.
Yeah. I actually. She can take. I don't want her tripping. It will survive. Because I have trouble following her. My trouble, she never. You're gonna have to learn how to work that cell phone. I live in what? Yeah, I only come down here occasionally. That's not bad. Yeah, it's her birthday.
That's really nice place.
Southern Belle. Really nice and for a while, and she was very.
She wanted to store behind the stove.
So it's from the 1800s, and it was at a time it was in India, and there was a time when Depression, so it turns out they had a lot of these synagogues that were left with scrolls. So one of the things that back in the day, we have the story word for word. He decided he was an Indian guy. He decided to give away because They don't get so passed in on ultimately really it's a cool scroll because a lot of them are harder paper. This one's actually it's really good. But it's do what? Oh, really? Oh, okay. Not this time. I was gonna say, I'm missing it. I didn't get any muscle over there.
I never heard of them.
Yeah. I love this matcha soup. Hey, good turnout. I'm glad everybody came. Now, I'll be here all night if anybody wants to stay here and eat and sing and dance. We are tonight, even if you're not still here when the sun goes down completely and it gets dark, you need to look at the moon. Because Passover is according to the Hebrew calendar, which follows the cycles of the moon, and it's the 14th day of the month according to the Hebrew calendar. So that puts us at the mid, which puts us at a full moon. So when the children of Israel left Egypt, the moon. So God is providing good moon.
Oh yeah, that.
Who made the mush? Did you make the mush bowl soup? Brooke? No, Brooke.
He used to be cute. He's not anymore. And of course,
I intended to thank everybody for bringing all the stuff. Now that I'm eating, I remember. So thank you all for bringing the stuff.
Sherry, I want this one.
You feed the grandbaby some food.
What's your problem? Well, you have to, sleep on it, let it
Yeah, I did that.
wake up in the middle of
You know,
the
I
night.
spent zero amount of money.
Yeah.
It's just Friday that just got, and went through on the second.
If I can do something for free, I'll do it for free. If it turns out it wasn't quality. So we got that came up. Yeah. You can.
Now we're gonna have, when we get all these cooked up and all, we'll practice.
You don't have to worry about words and stuff.
We're learning that over the next week.
Those words are
We'll get everything we need. He's got a snake, and he's got everything set up.
We
We just have to figure out, yeah. what we're gonna do.
Right on.
They did it, but
Oh, yeah.
yeah. Well, so it's funny. That's the day. And see what I think people miss is God gave us instruction. You think about it. Are y'all leaving?
Well, I'm gonna, my son has his last day tonight. My dad was texting me, was like, hey, they haven't started yet, so I'm about
Oh,
to
good, good. No problem. Be careful. Thank you for
Yes, sir.
coming.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Send an email.
But, you know, it's like,
A lot of times,
gives us.
Only the day that the animals never eat on the TV.
It is, but see,
That's where I'm at.
it's actually in Hebrew, it's mentioned in James. It's an actual festival. So you have Passover, and you count 50 days. So you put 50 days after Passover, and what happens? We're on the way back to the way.
Well, if we do it there.
Last year, we sure. But that took that real So they know something.
Really, that's where it originated.
Absolutely.
No, no, I have one. Jerry. Let me take a picture of it.
Hey, just take that one and make something good out of it. Yes. Yes. We're gonna definitely. Oh yeah. And so that's what I think he's got. Yeah, and we got, at the time we got that, more than we so it's, they kind of planned ahead on that one. Yeah.
I didn't see any wires.
We're gonna drop down out so I have,
Do you think you meant what she was supposed to do with like scissors?
yeah, my daughter, yeah, I gotta hit myself when I said it.
No, he's not. No, he's not. He's not.
Oh, I do.
No matter how fast it's going, it's like, bye. Oh, my head's actually on, bye. It's so stupid. She did that when on Barbie G.
So that might I want to do Parents are like that too.
Oh, I got it. Jack something.
You know,
Nobody knows. You didn't get it.
They weren't getting their money.
There's no bad name. I thought about you,
We watch it every day.
James, they like your show.
We watch the same show.
They're just saying, they watch. They're down with us. Now, Jamie said he wished they'd call it something else. They didn't have to kill it.
Yeah, they're cutting out half the demographic right off the bat.
He said he wouldn't have watched it if he didn't have to at first.
We've never done one. I saw that.
I got it. I watched the first.
Look at your first guy. One part home, like, yeah, like, watching. You mean Sarah? Emily likes it. Brandon likes it. Grace likes it. Brandon likes it. Emily likes it.
Yeah.
There's another
But
Grace. There's
I
another
do
Grace.
want to watch
There's two more
at least
Grace.
the first few.
And Brooke likes it.
So, she figured out.
It's hard to break into that your role.
Very
I want my kids to have oh, I forgot one of the girls.
Yeah. Even if it doesn't have to be hard,
That's what
it's just really-
I said something Marvel. Like there, no.
She made a shirt without it.
Instead of spreading the day, teenage, 15, so you kind of have to get it big or.
Close to a circle.
He loves it. She
He's doing other stuff other than that.
Yeah, he's got some parts in it. Like him coming, but coming because he is a real part.
Can you hear what we're saying?
That's why I need just for that. Just 30 seconds. Right now, he's trying to, he's on audition back on callback, which he's a run. Did a couple of daily. Some of the stuff that got technically
It's our name, Melissa, and the dog name Jack.
Doing good. How are you?
Do you other get that?
They have.
Martin Maynard, Raymond 24, John Barrell.
The first thing like but you look into it, yeah, that was she told me, I don't agree. I'll ask audio video no, I mean, you didn't tell me, I mean, he just told me this last night. I had never, I was so excited because he hadn't said anything about it. But that's what he was except for looking at some schools.
You can plan that, right?
You looked at it last night. I said,
Which one? You know what's the sad part? The sad part is that he likes the dog.
before you decided what you
I'm not gonna
Oh, yeah.
What do you believe?
I'll ask him.
And I have Enslavement, and then for short,
That's the one that
that's the first thing.
She thinks she looks like.
And then
Just take away.
Yeah.